We ready, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good.
Hill,
Here.
Mingus, Sutherland,
Here.
Mayor Call.
Here.
All present except Commissioner Mingus, Your Honor.
Thank you. Tonight's working session will be on an update on the 2045 Comprehensive Plan draft. And just remind everybody, no formal action will be taken. This is simply a working session to offer the presentation and any input we might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ty Livingston, the Director of Planning and Community Development. Ty, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we are in the home stretch of the comprehensive planning process. This has been a 2+ year-long process that we've gone through. And before we get started, before I yield the floor to Kristen Harden, our consultant on this project, I just want to say a few words. One, I want to thank the council and yourself for the support that you've shown throughout this process. It's a long process. There's lots of community involvement. I'd also like to thank the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, Ray Lees and Michael Bruner, who's also one of our zoning board members, were instrumental in securing a grant through IDOT, of all places, and this has funded 80% of this project. So it's been really nice to have that support to make this happen. I talked about the public engagement, and I think one of the times it was the most interesting is working with the high school students at EPCHS. I know, Mayor, you and I have met with students from Mr. Fleming's class and others. For this project, we went in front of Mr. Collins's class, and it was just a lot of fun. They were very engaged. That's the future of East Peoria, and to get their input in the process certainly was a really enjoyable part of the whole endeavor. I will mention that this is a fluid document, and I think I mentioned this before. This is not meant to be something static that sits on a shelf. It's something that we're going to refer back to. We're going to update as issues and challenges arise. So this isn't something that it's set in stone and we can never go back and change it. It's used as a guide. A couple of items tonight that Kristen will highlight are the future land use map, and this is one that we refer to quite a lot. This is when we're talking about rezoning of property or looking at development that's going to happen on the periphery of the city outside of our limits. This is a map that we commonly refer to and reference. The other one has to do with the future transportation network, and don't think of it as just sidewalks and streets. This is also for infrastructure extensions. As capital budgets come up, something from the state, something from the feds, this is a document that we're going to refer to and rely on, and so if it's an extension of a particular street, all the other infrastructure components have to come along with it, but it provides us a basis to go to those funding sources and access that money. That's something that we'll continue to look at. We've had a lot of success with that over the years. Our current plan, we've had to update that transportation map quite a few times because of the accomplishments of this council and previous ones. So right now, what was sent out a couple of weeks ago to you all as an electronic file is a working draft. We're looking for feedback tonight, and then anything that comes through. We do have this also out on eastpeoria2045.com to continue to receive comments. I know City Attorney Scott Brunton is working on some comments. Kristen's going to take all that, put it together, and before the next council meeting where we're going to ask the council to review and approve it, we'll have a final draft in front of you all. We'll also do a hard copy for everybody to take a look at. I know sometimes these are hard to digest and the 100+ pages electronically, so we'll get that out to everybody ahead of time. So at this point, I will yield the floor to Kristen Harden. She's been our consultant throughout the process. She's with PGAV, and she has kind of the final product here for you to take a look at and get your feedback. Kristen?
Awesome. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. It's nice to be back here in East Peoria and enjoying the winter scene here. So tonight, I just want to share kind of an outline or overview of the comprehensive plan process. So we'll hit some highlights of the overall planning process, but then walk through some of the framework pieces of the comprehensive plan. Feel free to stop me and jump in with any questions that you have. So For the comprehensive plan, we completed this in 2 phases over the last 2 years. Phase 1 was, really about us building our foundation of knowledge of, who East Peoria is and how demographics and development patterns and things have changed in recent years. And from there, we moved into phase 2, which is where the bulk of community engagement happened, although it occurred, continued throughout phases 3 and 4, but the bulk of it happened in phase 2. And so we had lots of outreach to the community, lots of public meeting, online participation, et cetera, just to ensure that, we were reaching a broad spectrum of the community as we were, really developing that vision for East Peoria's future. Phase 3 is where we got into land use planning. So we looked at the city overall, and then we had a couple of sub areas, the Richland Farms neighborhood, as well as the Four Corners district, where we kind of paid some special attention to the community's vision for the future and some of the potential opportunities for change there. And then phase 4, not phase 5, there's nothing happening after this, I promise. Phase 4 was where we put together the recommendations, drafted the plan, and now we're kind of here at the end getting ready for adoption. One of the very first things that we did working with staff at the beginning of this process, knowing that you guys were getting ready to embark on your own rebranding initiative, was really trying to figure out, how do we, kind of brand this planning process so that it's recognizable across the community and really even just kind of visually in all of the documents reflects who East Peoria is. And so working with our engagement consultant, Key Strategic Group, this was the brand that was created specifically for the comprehensive plan. And so looking at the work that came out of the overall branding initiative, I think we, did a nice job of kind of capturing the essence of the community. So this is, content that you all can continue to use, perhaps as you check off more of these recommendations, and you can kind of come back and say, hey, this was, a part of this 2-year effort that you residents and business owners participated in. So. The phase 1 deliverable was a community assessment report, and so it went through tons of information about land use and demographics and market trends, and really just, as I said, really trying to capture what's been happening in East Peoria, how has the community changed, and what does this change and these market trends say about the community's future? And then with community outreach in phase 2, there was a lot happening. We had a project website that was dedicated to the comprehensive plan, which we managed throughout this process. Looking at the website analytics, there were over 2,000 visits to the website. About 1,800 individual folks have checked in onto the website to kind of follow along the process. About half of that traffic was generated by a direct source. So that's someone either scanning a QR code on one of the posters or flyers that was sent out, or typing that project website directly into their mobile device or computer. About 25% of the website traffic came from social media. So, 75% between our engagement materials and all of the hard work from the city's community communications manager. I think that's, a pretty good show of force of, the outreach effort and the community's response to that. Through our outreach, we also maintained a list of email addresses from folks who subscribed to the online website or either left their name at one of our public meetings saying that they wanted to be kept updated on the project. So 187 folks received updates throughout this planning process about, upcoming events and draft plan documents and such that were available. in terms of, other ways that people got this information, there were a few websites that were kind of reposting some of the information that the city was sharing and following the website as well. And so, we just kind of wanted to recognize those other community partners who have been supporting this effort.
I'd say one thing we learned in this process is with the in-person engagement, the atrium space out here is a very valuable space. It was a great opportunity to interact with folks. I mean, we went to different locations. It wasn't just all here. But hosting events here and engaging the public, having it out in the atrium versus even in this space, we seem to get a lot more contact and opportunity to reach out to people. So we learned this is a really good space for any sort of public engagement activities, and we know others have taken advantage of that with the Regional Planning Commission and others.
I agree.
And so, as I mentioned, lots of meetings. We had 12 stakeholder focus group meetings. So some of those were one-on-one early on with some plan commissioners and I think one or two of our city council members. Others included, real estate folks in the community, schools, business owners, the school district. So, a lot of broad outreach just to get some different perspectives on what's happening in East Peoria and what the future should look like. And then in terms of more public output, we had 7 public meetings that included the 3 open houses that were here at City Hall, 4 pop-up events. We held 2 over at the community center in Richland Farms, and then we had one weekend where our team was here. I think we popped over to a local coffee shop, and then we were at the farmers market. So again, broad outreach, trying to meet people in different places in the community. We had a really awesome steering committee that included some residents, business representatives, local organizations, staff, of course, and then elected and appointed officials. So we had some city council, planning and zoning commission, ZBA, so a lot of voices and a lot of perspectives going into this work. And then, as Ty mentioned, a really neat experience working with some youth in the community. And all of that engagement just kind of culminated into our engagement summary report, which we shared. So that included, all of the feedback and kind of our synopsis of everything. And that all boiled down to, this draft vision statement, which essentially says that, housing, the commercial districts, the emphasis on those. So thinking about housing for all. So not everyone is looking for an apartment. Not everyone is looking for simply a single family home. So working with the tools that the city has in their control to create opportunities for diverse housing, making sure we're investing in our commercial corridors. We got the Levee District. This is an awesome place, but the Riverfront District, thinking about Washington Street, how do we continue to invest in those areas to ensure that they continue to thrive? And then sustainable development. So that's making sure that we're thinking strategically and using your resources and capacity in a smart way as you think about growing the city's boundaries, as we think about development and how future development impacts, infrastructure and the environment and things like that. So just being smart as we continue to grow, and all of those things work together to create a high quality of life for your residents. So that's the planning process. Next, this framework for the comprehensive plan. You've got that plan, but this is kind of an outline of the table of contents here. I'm going to focus on kind of highlighting a few of the objectives and key results, so some of those recommendations from the comprehensive plan. These recommendations are organized into what we call objectives and key results. These objectives and key results are kind of tucked into 5 major themes for the planning process. And so within 5 major theme or goal, each one has a set of its own objectives and then key results. Those objectives represent, what do we want to do related to housing, or what do we want to do to improve transportation and connectivity. And then the key results that support or undergird those objectives say, hey, here is, how we want to do this, or, here are some ideas that we can put into place to try to achieve that what. And so, again, piggybacking off of what Ty mentioned, just about East Peoria, you guys work smart and you work hard and you work fast, as we learned. So it's always nice to be able to showcase some early wins when you're going through a project like this. Especially given, the length of time that it takes to put into this. So as we were, doing our work as a team, you guys were also just, kind of moving forward on things on your own. And so it was nice to kind of see and encourage us a bit to say, hey, I think we're on the right track because, they're already kind of moving ahead on some things. So you adopted the Riverfront TIF district earlier this year. And so the Riverfront area is, a huge asset for East Peoria. We know kind of achieving, a big picture vision of this vibrant, mixed entertainment, commercial, what have you type of area is a very long-term goal. But having something, like that incentive tool there to support that, is a really nice first step. The wayfinding plan, of course, was something that we have alluded to in the comprehensive plan, and like you've done it. So, box checked, community, we're already working the plan.
It's a work in progress. We're getting there. I mean, it's a long, just getting placement for signage and that sort of thing. And the mayor's been working very closely with us on that. And it's just, it's small steps, but.
Yeah, but and those are those opportunities to say, hey, community, we heard you. It's in the plan, and now we're doing it. And then another one was that, boundary agreement, as we talked about the future growth. That was something we were able to kind of put together fairly early on in the process. And then you guys are, kind of going through that with your neighboring communities. And we've got that in place. So Washington, that was in place. Morton, that fell into place. And so moving along, want to continue working with all those neighbors. So soon. All right. So I'm going to highlight just one key result throughout all of our 4 main goals here. So as it relates to growth and development, this was really about how we reinvest in, your existing corridors and how you sort of manage growth. While you want to make sure that, we focus on those assets within the community today, making sure we're managing resources and infrastructure well, but then, we don't want to be short-sighted about growth opportunities. So we want to be planning ahead as well. So one objective and key result here, Objective 5, relates to transforming the Four Corners district into a vibrant mixed-use district. So this is something that we heard loud and clear from the community when we asked, what does the Four Corners district look like in the future? I think Marquette Heights was the top example that everyone shared with us, and it was like if we can have our own version of what Marquette Heights has, like, this
Peoria Heights.
Peoria Heights, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yes, Marquette Heights. That's
Yeah.
southwest, not northwest. Thank you for that correction. Peoria Heights, that was the #1 example that we heard. So one recommendation that we provided here is to, make some amendments to the Four Corners Overlay District to really just help facilitate that type of environment. And so what you see in the plan is us kind of going through that overlay district ordinance section by section and providing some recommendations on, zoning, land use, design standards and things that, just represent some opportunities for improvement that could really help, create that vibrant environment. And then when we think about housing, the focus here is on diversification. primarily, and, thinking about using the tools that we have at our disposal currently to create a more attractive housing environment for East Peoria. So one interesting idea here that came about as it relates to diversifying the city's housing stock was, thinking about, again, housing preferences, housing lifestyles, and how to make the best use of sometimes underutilized areas of the community that could be used for residential. So one recommendation here was to consider permitting the use of tiny home subdivisions. And so this is something that we are, kind of as planners in our wheelhouse, thinking about a lot more in terms of, ways to build density, put a different type of, housing stock on the market, and then lean into affordability in a different way. And so a tiny home subdivision, this is, not, a single prefab home that shows up on an individual lot between two pre-existing single-family homes. This could potentially be, an infill opportunity on a larger tract of land. Another example includes considering allowing the transition of mobile home parks that have kind of phased out to become tiny home subdivisions. So you build it out the same way you would with a regular residential subdivision with all the required infrastructure improvements, but for the same amount of land that you might build, 10 single-family homes on, for example, you gather a little bit more density, if you're building tiny homes, so smaller footprint lots, smaller building footprints, but again, builds density, gives you some diversity, and, puts something different into the market. Also, objective 2 related to just being creative in terms of the housing policies and incentive strategies that the city uses. So one thing we always like to do is think about, what are some of the things you're already doing? So beyond potential zoning changes that could help facilitate, desired development, we think about incentive tools. You guys are making great use of all of the statutory tools that the state allows. Something else that you guys currently have in place is that vacant and foreclosed property registration program. And so it's an opportunity to, think about the fees from a program like that. While it's a program that's used to, deter, bad behavior. And, we'd hope that, that pot of funds doesn't build up, because that means that, homes aren't vacant and people are investing in the housing stock. But where you do have, that pot of funds, how do you kind of flip that and use those dollars to, put back into the housing stock, help the, residents in your community who are here and who are, ready and willing to reinvest and contribute to the overall value of the community. So really, that's, just kind of one idea about leveraging some of the existing tools that you have. And when we think about transportation and connectivity, the big priorities here were really thinking about how do we help people get around East Peoria a little better. So thinking about modes of transportation. Right now, just given the existing infrastructure that we have and the way that the city was built out, it makes East Peoria a very car-centric type of community. So thinking about, how do we, first help folks who, need to travel via public transit or walking or biking, but then also thinking about the existing infrastructure. How do we, kind of make this more navigable for the community? So one key result here kind of goes back to the wayfinding program, but applies it to, again, this idea of making East Peoria a bit more navigable. So early on, one big idea that we heard from lots of different voices was creating this, sort of bypass corridor, and, that kind of phased out of the conversation pretty quickly. But again, just the way that the community has developed with that 5 fingers kind of corridors, you don't have a ton of kind of cross corridors that get you north to south very easily. So something interesting and something that's done in Branson, Missouri to, help all those tourists get to different assets on their main corridors is a simple color-coded wayfinding strategy. So if I know I'm going to the aquarium that's on Highway 67, I know that that's an asset that's on the yellow corridor, for example. And so if I'm on red, I know to follow the, particular wayfinding signs to get to the yellow corridor, and, that's going to help me navigate that kind of north-south pattern in an area that can be pretty busy and doesn't have, again, in this example, a lot of kind of major north-south corridors, but it helps people get around. So I'm just thinking about creative ways like that can be put into place here. And then lastly, on the topic of recreation and tourism, one of the important things that was acknowledged here is that the city of East Peoria is not the park district. So 2 separate entities responsible for bringing recreation and tourism to the community in different ways. And so, we really wanted to make sure that we focus on, again, what the city can control, and that's your asset in the East Side Center. And so we know that this is a very good draw for sports tourism. And so in the vein of really expanding tourism opportunities for East Peoria, the idea here is to, think about the diversifying the types of uses and activities and events that are happening at those facilities at East Side Center, and how can this be kind of put to better use year-round and outside of the sports tourism events that are already happening. So alternative sports, non-sports events, festivals, concerts, and so it really, requires the kind of the director of that asset, really kind of leaning into partnership with the Convention and Tourism Bureau, tracking down, event vendors and sponsors and things like that, and just, again, thinking creatively about different ways to use what we already have. And then lastly, the big components of the comprehensive plan that everyone looks forward to is the future land use map and the major street layout. So these 2 components together constitute your future land use plan. So why are these important? So your future land use strategy and these maps together, this is something that staff, your planning and zoning commission, ZBA, city council, like you should all be referencing, whenever you have some type of rezoning or development action coming before you. These are 2 maps that you can look back on to quickly say, hey, does this project align with the vision that we've established for our community? And these are maps and information that are out there publicly, and so it also, in some ways, can help reduce some risk associated with the development. If we've got an updated future land use map and the development community knows, hey, on North Main Street, the city is looking for XYZ types of development, maybe I can start, noodling around with the market potential or site potential of something, knowing that I'm already going in the direction of what the city says that, they're willing to consider. So again, rezoning, development plans, thinking about new subdivisions, and I think an important one here is those infrastructure improvement projects. So as you're putting your CIP and your budgets together, those are, 2 maps that you'll want to make sure that we're referencing.
Kristen, real quick, if you don't mind me piping in here, speaking of the future land use maps and, you know, including projects and whatnot, I think that'd be a good place to fit in pre-annexation agreements too, that help protect any future land use plans that we might have too. So Ty and I have talked about that recently as a way to help bolster and protect what we have planned. So
Yeah, absolutely. And a common strategy, and you guys have probably done this in the past. I know annexed property typically comes in as R1, but, you know, a way to kind of streamline the process if it's, you know, commercial, for example, and it's that way on your future land use map, and you kind of, you know, gone through those conversations and you know that this is a project that is going to be supported, you know, how do you tee up that rezoning action within that annexation process to kind of cut out a, you know, a step in those kind of administrative procedures for a developer. So I think those little things can make a big difference sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, and one difference from our current future land use map is that this new one is going to go to the full extent of our 1.5 miles. You know, granted, we've got some boundaries with the river, with where we meet up with Morton as well as Washington, but the difference here is instead of going out 3/4 of a mile, or, you know, it wasn't a full 1.5 miles. This is going to go the full extent to ensure that we've got, you know, at least some documentation of what future land use the city would like to see, in part to protect us and guide development in those areas.
Yes, so as Ty mentioned, the future land use map, it designates the future land use for all properties within East Peoria's current boundary, as well as all parcels within 1.5 miles of the city's boundary that do not overlap with another community's incorporated land or designated parcels within another community's 1.5 mile boundary. So we work closely with staff and, you know, determine, hey, this is, you know, the area in which we want to grow, and here's where, you know, we're not interested in growing at this time. So this map does that. It also shows those existing boundary agreements that you have in place. So, you know, just thinking about areas of change, one to kind of highlight here, in East Peoria. So, you know, you can look at this in some of the key areas, that corridor here near the East Side Center. You're looking at this map on the top, and I know this is small and cut off just a smidge. You can see the existing land use from some different key corridors, and then kind of zone in on like what's the future land use. And in this area where you have a lot of kind of existing like small local businesses kind of scattered among some existing residential, was, you know, discussed with our advisory committee as a, you know, really great opportunity to see mixed use on a smaller neighborhood scale really become more prominent.
This is the Meadow Corridor.
Yes.
Yeah. Already has kind of the makings for some mixed use as it is. I mean, it's got some of those components already.
And then, as we mentioned before, the Riverfront District, great opportunity for, you know, a wide mix of uses. And here on the future land use map, you'll see that the entirety of the riverfront development area is primarily designated as special interest planning area. And so this is an area where, you know, ideally you're probably going to see a lot of, you know, planned developments come through because, you know, projects here are more likely going to include a mix of uses, and it's going to require a lot of, you know, really detailed and creative uses of zoning and development standards.
For example, right now, we've got a planned unit development, a PUD, which comprises the Eastport Marina development. You've got those different uses kind of stacked together, and likely as we look at future redevelopment north of I-74, there's some potential for that same kind of development.
And then the major street layout component of this map shows the existing street network, focusing on the major corridors based on the Federal Highway Functional Classification System. So you'll see your arterial, collector, and local roads. And then likewise, in areas where our team has identified potential opportunities for new key roads to facilitate aspects of the future land use map, those arterial, collector, and local roads are also identified on this map. Now, this is not all encompassing, every new road that might happen in the next 10, 20 years, but just looking at current development patterns and growth opportunities that have kind of been envisioned through this process. Some of those roads have been identified on the map. A couple, highlights here. One potential new road that was highlighted on this map was the extension of Hoffer Lane, potentially as an outer road along that stretch of 74, to kind of make that connection between Pinecrest and my text is a little small. I believe this is Pleasant Hill Road?
Pleasant Hill.
Right.
Yeah.
Pleasant Hill. There's a potential outer road as a way to, potentially open up access to available land at some point in the future, if redevelopment opportunities arise. And then you've got Bloomington Road that kind of dead ends at that trail there that could potentially, again, create some additional connectivity in this area. And then looking south beyond the city's southern boundary, the future land use map identifies lots of residential opportunities here, and then the extension of commercial and potentially mixed use along the Springfield Road corridor. And the future land use map shows that, given this, vast amount of currently vacant land, there's likely going to be the need for some additional collector level roads running east and west as you get, subdivision and things like that built out here to tie back to Springfield.
This area here in particular has the opportunity to be set up more on that traditional grid system. Unlike most of East Peoria where we have to navigate in and around the hills and valleys, south of town here right now it really has the potential to have those east-west connections. As I mentioned before, think of this as infrastructure in its entirety. This is not just streets. The other pieces have to come along with it with infrastructure to make this area work and allow it to be developed.
And then the last one highlighting here is north of East Peoria's current boundary. So this is the area just north of the bridge here, and then you've got North Main Street and the river. So we know much of this area closer to the river is floodplain and, will likely be, conserved. But you already have some industrial and commercial in some parts of this area. And thinking about the future, if industrial continues to grow in order to, support not, creating too many kind of points of access directly off of the main road here, making this connection between Zinzin Road and Upper Free Ridge here could be a way to really kind of facilitate new development opportunities and retain, fewer access points onto Main Street. And so, working with IDOT, it can often be challenging, getting access to the road. So just kind of taking advantage of those points of access you already have. So that's the future land use map, the major street layout map. Again, just a few highlights. And then as far as the sub-area plans go, in Richland Farms, this map you see here is kind of a brain ideation map of some of the different concepts and opportunities we saw for this neighborhood. But talking with the community and going through this process, there were three things important here: thinking about land use and development, infrastructure, and then services. So when we talk about land use and development, zoning is going to be, crucial. Right now, we've got the industrial zone that was really created for this area when industrial was more prominent than it is currently and anticipated to continue to grow in that particular neighborhood. So with this future land use plan, if that's not the direction, if we want to see housing or if we want to see other uses beyond industrial happen here, then, the recommendation is to, think strategically, be proactive, and figure out like what's the appropriate zoning district that'll support growth in this neighborhood. Housing is important. You've primarily got single-family homes in this neighborhood. A lot of residents here who, seem rooted and want to stay here. But again, the right zoning needs to be in place to help housing continue to be a feasible land use for the neighborhood. And then economic development. So we know that this is sort of economically depressed demographic that currently lives in the neighborhood. So as development occurs, as if we're thinking about how to support development and make it more feasible, how do we use some of the existing tools we have in place to help support the type of development that the city wants to see happen here? So infrastructure, primarily maintenance and improvements. So making sure that our infrastructure is, able to, handle, flooding that happens through here, working with the drainage and levee district to make sure that, other entities who are responsible for infrastructure here are doing what they need to do to help support a good quality of life for residents is important. Connectivity, we've got a lot of sidewalks here, so really it's like filling in the gaps. How do we make sure that we have a complete network here to help people navigate over to the levee district that's got all these great assets that this neighborhood could use. And then in terms of services, we heard very strongly from residents here that they want to see code enforcement in their neighborhood, and we even had one person who acknowledged that he was part of the problem but understood that code enforcement needed to happen in order for the neighborhood to become better. So it was it's nice to see someone look in the mirror on themselves. So I think that's a priority for the neighborhood. And then again, working with the Parks District to really think about the long-term future of the community center, which really seems to be the heart and soul of that neighborhood down there. So I want to make sure that that continues to be of use. And then finally, the Four Corners District. Again, as we mentioned, what we heard loud and clear from residents is that the Four Corners District should become East Peoria's version of a vibrant, traditional, walkable downtown area. What our team did throughout this project is we went through several iterations of a 3D kind of massing model of what the future of the Four Corners District could look like. And what we ended up with was one preferred kind of massing plan that sort of envisions kind of two futures, I would say. West of Main Street, you've got a few pockets of redevelopment opportunity. On this end, kind of mimicking more of what you see here in the Levee District just across the street from us, kind of dense, compact, small footprint commercial uses, but really focusing on that corridor streetscape improvement to make sure that the area is very walkable. And then east of Main Street on Washington, really leaning into the existing historic buildings and making sure that we preserve that and support more mixed use and commercial development that continues to kind of reflect that more traditional character. And so, just a couple kind of conceptual renderings that our team did that kind of spoke to the vision and what we heard from the community. This is one conceptual rendering that was on Main Street in Washington looking east, and kind of showing, again, in a similar vein as what we see here in the Levee District, just across the street from us, kind of compact, commercial, potential opportunity here. And then going through this process, streetscape and design roadway was something that came up. And again, this was just a way to kind of visualize what potential change could look like. And then moving forward, it's really going to be up to, the city, the community to, really study the feasibility of these different changes and really make the decision that's going to be best for East Peoria overall. This conceptual rendering here was looking at McKinley Street, again, preserving like the stock of historic buildings, long-term, as redevelopment occurs, showing that, hey, the community would support a more mixed-use environment here if those opportunities arise. And then thinking about McKinley Street, how can this serve as an opportunity to bring some open space to the Four Corners district? So keeping that thoroughfare open, as, driving lanes for traffic, but could this be an opportunity where, hey, you have a special street festival, an event, hey, this could be a potential area that, maybe it shuts down for special city festivals or something, and then it really just kind of plays up the development that happens around it, again, as a way to, bring some public gathering and open space to this side of the downtown area. And then another one is just Main Street at Washington, looking east. So again, making sure that we retain those existing buildings, looking to the streetscape to, make improvements that make the area more pedestrian friendly and improving the aesthetic environment. So that is kind of the high-level overview of the comprehensive plan. I believe next up on you all's agenda will be considering this for adoption at your next couple city council meetings. From here, I'm happy to take any feedback that you all have for us to go back and make revisions and hopefully have this back to you in the next week or so for adoption.
Well, first of all, thank you. You've done a great job. I know it's been a lengthy process, and I appreciate everybody's input. I know there are a lot of people to thank for getting us to this point. I know Scott's working on a couple of things to send back to you on from his perspective that he wanted to see some changes in there. That's why it's not before us anyway for final adoption. It gives us a couple more weeks to weigh in on any changes we'd like to see. Anything you gentlemen would like to add?
I really like just obviously this is just a conceptual picture, but even McKinley Street, the potential that's still there. Sometimes you forget about what it could be. I'm not a real, visual person for things that aren't in front of me.
The only challenge that I could see there, and I think you know where I'm going to go, emergency access to the retirement home, El Hasty. That's always been the challenge of why we've not allowed that street to be shut down, like we have Shop and Stroll coming up.
Sure.
And a lot of that has to do with access for the first responders.
I love I remember being a kid, the Centennial Celebration was in that area, being on the big slide. Those 40-some years ago, and it was just a neat area, and the whole thing was well done, I believe, and I don't know, it's nice to have somebody else look at it and tell us what else can be done.
Yeah. Any other comments from council?
Well, you know what? I think we're going the right direction, but I think maybe it's going to be, I don't know, like in Richland Farms area. I would love to see them prosper and be able to build on and build up and just build. But the way the restrictions are that the city of East Peoria has on lot sizes. So if somebody tore down a house, you still couldn't build a new house on there, So then you would have to wait for the next neighbor house to be torn down to combine the lots. And then when you did that, the water table is so high in Richland Farms that once you get 5 or 6 feet down and the river is up, that raises the water table up, that means just simple things like putting a sewer in is going to cost $1 kabillion. So I think we need to rethink the whole thing about if we do something in Richland Bottoms, raise the ground level. So instead of being 4 foot too low, just they would have to build something higher, and then we need to build our sewers higher because we have a new law now that that new homes have to be pumped. So you can't run the sewer underneath the footings anymore for all gravity feed. You have to gather up everything in your basement and pump it up to where it's 4 feet under the grass and go out. That means your main sewers don't have to be 18 feet deep and 16 feet deep. And so times they are changing. So I think those things need to be addressed to help out that part of the community. And like the rest of the community, I think that what's really a holdback in residential here is the school taxes. That's out of our control. That's out of everybody's control except for the election of the school districts. I mean, so.
We'll save those comments for the next regular meeting. We have the tax levy on there.
You know how I am. It was on my head, so I had to get it off my chest.
Yeah. And just to follow up on those comments, I think, those are great comments on like next step action items, and the typical next step after community adopts their comprehensive plan is they do the code update. So you're looking at your zoning code, your subdivision code, and considering, hey, what changes do we need to make to development standards? And, that can include focusing in on, certain neighborhoods or districts to say, hey, anything that gets built here needs to be so many feet above the base flood elevation to kind of mitigate, flood and those types of concerns. So definitely great points to kind of take into, the next big project for the city.
Very good points. Anything else?
No.
Mayor, I have just a point to that, and I asked this question years ago, and I don't know, I can't remember what crowd I asked it in, but Commissioner does make a good point that for the neighborhood, it's difficult for them to develop because the costs make it, counterproductive. Well, I've often wondered if there's a vehicle like a TIF program we have for business community, if there's a similar vehicle for residential. And I don't know if that's possible or not, or if there is anything that could help a city, help a neighborhood develop.
So with Richland, there's a multifaceted approach here. Some of it is, allowing for different housing types. We've had a couple of houses that have been constructed down there in the last 20 years. They were both Habitat for Humanity. They went on an existing lot, but it's challenging. I mean, there's a lot of other issues, as Commissioner Sutherland points out. There are incentives available. One of the things we're exploring with an expansion of the enterprise zone is introducing enterprise zone for everything down to a certain size. And maybe single-family housing is not exactly where it's at. Maybe it's a triplex or a duplex or something like that. But that's one thing that we're taking a look at and we'll bring back to the council is, that type of incentive. We met with the PAR Government Affairs Group, the local realtors group, recently here, and they were very interested in exploring that option, that they felt like that would be a nice boost. I mean, the schools is always going to be a challenge, what their taxes are, and that's something out of our control, so all we can do is work on what we can control, and they seem to indicate that they thought that was a good incentive to offer, something worth exploring further, utilizing enterprise zone to kickstart development, not just in Richland Farms, but throughout the community.
Well, we do have a little bit of control because 0.25% or something like that of our sales tax goes directly to the school because they couldn't pass a referendum. So the council sometime before me passed the rule that everybody that buys something is supporting the school district and it's got to go to the building funds, okay? I could be corrected on that. I don't think I'm wrong. And let me tell you something about the Habitat Humanity houses that was built down in Richland. I was down there working when they were putting in the basement on one of them, and I walked up to him and I said, hey, you're too deep. And the guy said, hey, I know what I'm doing, and I've been doing this for so many years. I said, you're too deep. Look around you. Look at the porches. The porches are 4 or 5 feet out of the ground. You have to walk up onto a porch to walk into the house. There's a reason for that. The reason is the water table. And the guy said, I know what I'm doing, so I left him alone. As far as I know, that house has never had furniture in the basement. It's got 4 sump pumps running 24 hours a day to keep the basement wet 6 and 7 and 8 months out of the year. It's a wasted space. It is, that should be something, if this city is going to be involved with, I don't want to use the word zoning, but inspections, that would be a big one. That would be a huge one. That people that didn't have the technology back then had the brains to figure out where the water table was.
Okay.
I'm done.
We have about 5 minutes here before we have to adjourn this meeting. We have a regular meeting directly afterwards. Anyone in the audience want to comment? Any public comment? No? Hearing none? Commissioners, anything else you'd like to add before we can?
No, I just would like to, again, thank Kristen and her team, Ty and Brad, who've helped, and then the many scores of other people that have helped in this process. As it was stated at the beginning, a very long process to get to where we're at today.
Very good. Ty, anything else? Nope. Kristen? Thank you.
No, thank you.
Appreciate you. All right, I'd seek a motion to adjourn the working session.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Oh, all right, thank you, Commissioner Hill. Commissioner Decker, any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call.
Commissioner Decker?
Aye.
Hill?
Aye.
Sutherland?
Aye.
Mayor Call?
Aye.
All present voting, aye, Your Honor.
This working session is adjourned. We'll reconvene promptly at 6 PM for the regular meeting.